did you know that it's National Sickie Day today?
The only reason I knew this is we've been teasing this all programme. But according to research, the first Monday in February is the worst day of the year for absenteeism, with post-Christmas blues, poor weather and a long wait for the summer holiday season just a few of the factors involved.
Although I read that more people than normal are going away, went away in January. There you go.
But should we be asking, should you have to prove that you're off sick today off work? Well, let's join now with the political commentator Russell Quirk for a bit of a ding-dong on this issue. Russell, are we a nation of slackers?
Yes. In short, Tom, we are, and the data, the numbers actually demonstrate such. And actually, I think the big issue is not just the fact that overall we're taking more sick days, despite the fact, of course, that we're working from home more than we ever have. I mean, you would think that people would be quite happy with the fact that they're getting up later, not having to commute, and are working from home most, if not all of the time now, and therefore wouldn't quite need to ring in with a fake sickie, a sickie. The reality is, though, of course, with the public sector in particular, so the Daily Express today are reporting that the amount of days that are lost to civil service workers now is up from 1.4 million to 1.8 million days lost in the civil service. And 50-odd% of those sick days apparently are attributed to so-called stress. Now, sorry, cry me a river, guys, but I mean, show me a genuinely stressed civil servant. I don't think so.
So, Russell, do you think the solution is to make all employees, all workers, hand in some kind of letter from their doctor explaining why they're sick in order to take a day off?
Well, the problem is you won't get to see your doctor, will you? Because obviously, as part of Broken Britain, it'll take you a month to get to see a doctor. So unfortunately, I'd love that to be the solution, whereby you have to prove that you are ill. I don't think actually that legislation is the way forward. I'm rather a small state person rather than a big state person. But I do think the employers should be able to say, look, if the average amount of days sick that Britain takes per person is 5, guess what? Unless you do have some special reason, particularly a medical certificate, we as an employer, whether it be private or public sector, simply will not pay you from day 6 onwards during that 12 months. So I think, you know, I hate to use stick rather than carrot, and I don't think legislation is the answer, as I say, but I think we have to get Britain back to work again. But I go back to my point, the public sector is in a dire place in terms of the public sector now being 59% more likely to take time off than the private sector.
Is this a problem perhaps not with law, but with society? Surely if we as Brits just played by the rules and used the system as it was intended, this wouldn't be a problem.
Well, absolutely, but I'd like to see that echo through most of society, really, whether it were crime or immigration or, you know, doing the right thing as a society generally. But we seem to have a rather devil-may-care attitude to the rules now, don't we? And perhaps part of that in the wider sense in terms of crime and so on is because we never see the police on our streets anymore, despite them costing us more than ever. So, yes, I would love society to be not just people that play by the rules. I'd like society to play by the rules, but actually perhaps to be a little less selfish and more selfless in everything that it does.
Russell, I'm just going to bring in the author and writer Rebecca Reed, who I believe has a slightly different view to you on this. Rebecca, do you think you should have to prove that you're unwell before you take a day off work?
No, of course not. And sometimes you just need a day off. I think if you're generally speaking a good employee who's relied upon, does good quality of work, very occasionally you are hungover or sad or you've had a breakup or you just really don't feel like it. And if it is occasional and you are a really good employee elsewhere, I think that employers should have some flexibility for that and some understanding.
Rebecca, why do you have to lie to your employer? If you're a good employee, why don't you use one of the copious number of holiday days that we're guaranteed by statute in this country?
Because generally speaking, and I have tried it, if you wake up on Tuesday morning and you have had a hot break or a really bad hangover and you message and say, today's not going to work for me, can I take the day off? They say, no, you have to book holiday ahead of time. That's not how this works. So I think there's a little bit of an expectation that very occasionally, once in a blue moon, you do just do something a little bit naughty. And again, if you're good and reliable elsewhere, use a bit of understanding coming from both sides.
Russell, is Rebecca the problem?
Unfortunately, Rebecca is very, very much the problem. I mean, my question to Rebecca is, what's the limit? I mean, how many hangovers a year am I allowed to have? 20, 30? How many days of anxiety because my pet's ill might I be able to take advantage of on the basis that my employer then has to suffer, and so do my fellow employees, as a consequence of me deciding to shirk my job responsibilities time and time again? It's funny, though, isn't it, that those on the left, like Rebecca, I presume, that say that we should just be able to have time off whenever we want, are also the same people that lament the fact that under the current government we're not very productive and our economy isn't very strong. Rebecca, you can't have it both ways, can you?
I mean, I don't tend to lament that, and I don't think it's necessarily to do with this. I would say that a good example is that in companies, particularly the sort of more Palo Alto tech companies, where they've implemented policies where there's unlimited holiday, so employees are self-regulate about how much time they take off. People tend to take slightly less holiday than they are entitled to under a system where you get 28 set days. Generally speaking, a lot of consultancy companies have provided reports that say that if you treat people like grown-ups and you give people a lot more autonomy over their work, they are more likely to do a better job for you. Your retention levels are generally higher, and people tend to report better satisfaction. So the stick method doesn't tend to create good retention or good employee productivity through employee happiness. So it might sound all very fluffy, but it actually is it's a very good way of saving money.
Russell, you're stuck in the past. Things have moved on. People can regulate themselves.
Rebecca's convinced me. I think we should all be lobbying for the one-day week. That will cure it by the sounds of it.
I mean, that's about what I try and work in any given week, and I'm enjoying my life.
And you do a fabulous job, I must say.
Yeah. Well, I'm delighted that we've reached some sort of, I guess, consensus. Perhaps not. Rebecca, just finally, that system that you're speaking about, these Californian tech companies that sort of self-regulate and tell people to do whatever they want, surely you don't need any statutory limits then? You can let companies set their own rules and you don't need any statutory holiday, any statutory sick days.
So that's an unlimited, the policy there is that there is an unlimited amount that you can take, and you are obliged to take a certain amount. Obviously, the American system is very different because they have much less holiday statutorily, and it is done state by state. But in those companies, you are expected to take, I think, a minimum of 12 days a year to prevent burnout. So they sort of protect you, but encourage you to take more. But again, these are soft benefits. That's better. That's cheaper than paying people more or giving people better pensions. So sometimes the reality of it is not quite as good as it sounds. But no, we do still need statutory protections, particularly for things like maternity, sickness, and general working patterns. The only flaw with the system is it doesn't really work for people on 0 hours contracts and people working in jobs like, for instance, in a shop, where you don't have that same level of protections. And it's really important we don't just think about white-collar workers when we talk about how to make work better and fairer.
Yeah, I also wonder if some of the people working in these big tech companies are some of the most motivated workers out there anyway. But thank you very much, Russell Quirk and Rebecca Reed. Great debate there. Very different views. Excellent stuff. I think that taking a sick day once in a blue moon, pulling a sickie, probably isn't the worst thing in the world, but when it becomes a pattern... When it becomes a pattern...
Tell the truth!
Oh, you're going to phone up and say you've got a bit of a hangover. Obviously, you're